Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to talk about the movies. I'm Skye Jethani, and joining me as always is Josh Lindsey.
Hey, everybody.
We're glad you're back with us. We apologize for having waited so long to do another one of these episodes. This is episode 6 of the movie proposal, and I completely take responsibility for our lack of recording because, especially in October, I was traveling a ton and speaking a ton, and life was busy. But things are slowing down now, so we're back in the saddle.
And there's better movies out now, too.
There are better. Yeah, we kind of had that, what's it called? What's it when you're a lack of something, a dearth?
Sure.
Yeah. Doldrums. There was nothing worth seeing.
It was a lousy movie season after the summer.
If you are not familiar with this podcast format, here's the deal. We format this around movie matrimony. So we talk about something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. In that last segment, it's not what you think. So we're going to begin right off the bat. Josh, you have something old that you want to share with the audience quickly that they should watch?
Yeah, so we're talking about Doctor Strange today, and so I wanted to pick something that was strange. And my something old is Time Bandits.
Time Bandits, yeah.
1981, John Cleese, Sean Connery, Shelley Duvall.
I haven't seen that in forever.
Yes, so Terry Gilliam was the director. I don't know if he wrote it or not, but probably did. And quick story. I loved going to school up until second grade. I had like your worst nightmare teacher ever.
I did too in second grade.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh man, we have so much in common. So my parents bribed me to go to school because I refused to go to school. And they said, if you go to school for 10 days, we'll take you to a movie. And I remember standing in my dining room, taking a deep breath. All right, I can do this. I did my time, 10 days of school. And the two movies that were out that I could choose from were Time Bandits and Raiders of the Lost Ark.
They would take you as a second grader to Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Yes, and so they were rated PG, right? So
that's right. Yeah.
So my older sister, who I didn't get along with at the time, wanted to see Raiders. So I, of course, picked Time Bandits, and absolutely loved it. One of the strangest films out there. It's something I enjoy watching from time to time. On a side note, Raiders of the Lost Ark is my all-time favorite film, and I turned it down to see it in the theaters because of my sister.
Wow.
I've had 2 opportunities in my life to see Raiders in the theater, and both times I missed it because of a girl, which I really regret. But back to Time Bandits.
The second time wasn't your wife.
It was my wife.
And you still regret it?
We were dating. The 2 movies that we could see were Remember the Titans or Raiders. They had like a re-release celebration something. And I remember thinking, I've never seen this in the theaters.
And she didn't want to see it.
Well, I didn't think she wanted to, so I picked. But I found out later she didn't care, so it was my fault. But
wow, that's
anyway,
the last time you're going to be sensitive to your wife.
That's right. Time Bandits, great film. Go see it.
Okay, so my something old. We are recording this on Monday, November 7th. Tomorrow is Election Day, and the end of this incredibly horrible period of American history. And everyone is, no matter how you're voting tomorrow, pretty much everyone is unhappy with their options. So I thought we need a movie to remind us what a fictional president can be, like a really good president. And I thought of The American President with Michael Douglas and Annette Bening.
Yes.
And one of the reasons I like this film is if you are a fan of The West Wing, the Aaron Sorkin TV show, The American President was sort of the precursor to that show because it was also written by Aaron Sorkin.
Oh, okay.
And many people may not remember. Martin Sheen, of course, was President, whatever his name, Bartlett, in the television show, The West Wing. But in The American President, he plays the chief of staff to Michael Douglas. And the banter of The West Wing, that typical Aaron Sorkin kind of back and forth, fast-paced action, it's all there in that movie. And it's a kind of a love story. It's about a president who's a widower, and he falls in love with a lobbyist, and it's kind of scandalous that a president and a lobbyist would be in a relationship. But it's just, I mean, Michael Douglas is a fun actor, and Annette Bening is adorable in the movie, and forget the politics of it. It's just a fun story. Another one that I thought of thinking of recommending.
Can I guess?
Is
Dave?
Dave's one.
All right.
Yeah, but the other 2, which are kind of presidential but not fictional, are 13 Days.
Oh,
you remember that?
Kevin Costner?
With Kevin Costner, it's about the Cuban Missile Crisis
in
October 1962, was it? 62, 63? About John Kennedy and the White House and all the things that went on behind the scenes about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then Lincoln, with Daniel Day-Lewis, Steven Spielberg movie, which is also very political.
Did you see that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, these are just a couple old movie Lincoln's not that old, but Abraham Lincoln is quite old. To kind of reinvigorate your hope and potential of what the presidency can be, because it's pretty much been dashed for all of us this
I like
year.
it. All
right. So on to something new, and this is where we're going to get into a new movie that we've both recently seen, and this weekend we both went out and saw separately Doctor Strange.
Doctor Strange.
The 14th Marvel movie, which is, it's hard to believe they've done 14. But here we are. So, Josh, give people who don't know a brief summary of the flick.
All right. Well, the quick one is a former neurosurgeon embarks on a journey of healing only to be drawn into the world of mystic arts.
Mystic arts.
Yes, starring Benedict Cumberbatch.
That sounds like a gift shop in New Mexico. Okay,
Which they reference in the movie. Gift
yes,
shops?
they do, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so in this segment, we each have to offer a proposal that we can then debate whether or not we agree or disagree with these proposals. So, Josh, what is your proposal for Doctor Strange?
I propose that Doctor Strange was made for Christian geeks everywhere.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Simple, short. Mine's a little bit more complicated than that.
Let's hear it.
Here's my proposal. I propose that Doctor Strange will be the first, but not the last Marvel movie that will result in some Christians calling for a boycott of Marvel Studios.
Oh, interesting. All right, this should be. Let's start with yours. Why boycott it?
Because anytime a popular movie deals with magic or sorcery, I'm thinking back to Harry Potter.
Yeah.
It upsets certain segments of conservative Christians who feel, and actually this has already happened. I found that there's already a Christian reviewer online. Here's the title of his article: Doctor Strange opens doors to demonic occultic deception.
Oh, fantastic.
So there's already this kind of percolating sense from some uber conservative Christians that this is demonic and it's evil and it's sorcery and Christians should stay far, far away from it. And I find that a little bit interesting given that I saw quite a few Christian themes in the movie.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And the director, as we'll talk about a little later, is a committed Christian.
He is.
So anyway, and your proposal, you think people are going to geek out on it who are
Christians? Well, right, because of the Christian themes that I saw in it, and this Dr. Stephen Strange, goes on a spiritual journey, which very much overlaps a Christian going on a spiritual journey, where he starts out as he's a jerk. He's self-absorbed. It's basically his life is about himself and not.
And this is Benjamin Cabbage Patch. What's his name?
Cumberbatch.
Cumberbatch?
Cumberbatch.
Not Cumberbun.
Nope.
Not Cabbage Patch. Not Cucumber Patch.
And I get it wrong all the time too. But he is one of my current favorite actors.
From Sherlock, the BBC show, which is fantastic.
Yes, that really should be. We should be talking about that show. But
I mean, you gotta admit this film with him in the leading role was perfectly cast.
It was.
Like the moment you think of who should play Doctor Strange, it has to be Benedict Cumberbatch.
And he was their first pick.
Yeah.
And in fact, they moved the release date a year out because he couldn't do the original release date.
Just to fit his availability.
Yes.
What do you think of him with the American accent?
Because
he's British.
Yeah, it was okay. It was fine.
Was it distracting?
It
to you?
was. Yeah, because I know his voice, and
Yeah.
I kind of thought that's the voice he was going to use was his original voice, and he does an okay job, I think, but it was distracting.
It was distracting for me at first, but I kind of got used to it.
Okay.
And hey, most Marvel movies are really not about the dialogue.
That's true. Well, so going back to the idea of like the Christian geeky thing, I do see a spiritual path, that he takes, going from being self-absorbed to being part of something greater and thinking of other people. You mentioned Harry Potter. I go all the way back to Dungeons and Dragons. I've got one foot in the geeky nerd world.
Oh yeah.
I remember when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons for the 3 months that I did that.
And you got out. You're not like a part of some satanic cult.
That's correct. That is correct, Skye.
If you had stayed any longer,
if it was 4 months,
it would have been over.
My grandmother came to our house. I remember the day, and in front of me told my mother, if you know anyone doing Dungeons and Dragons, you've got to get them out of this. For all the same reasons that this guy's talking about Doctor Strange. And my mother just said, okay, and kept her mouth shut, and I didn't say anything. And she's like, Josh, don't worry about it. It's okay.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised that we don't have an entire generation of kids who are in the occult because they all grew up reading Harry Potter.
Right.
You know, there's just the fear-mongering, the warnings and the hysteria that goes on around some of these things is just so overblown. But it's going to happen again with this movie.
Right. And the thing is, I look at it as another Star Wars, which, on a side note, this was very much Star Wars. But just in terms of like...
What do you mean?
Well, you can just line the characters up. You've got Darth Vader, which is the guy with the
Caecilius.
Eyes. Yeah, those are the names, by the way, in this movie. I could not latch on to the names. I needed to see them.
Like Wong?
Not Wong.
Was that hard for you?
Dormu or whatever.
Dormammu?
Yeah, see, Dormammu. I couldn't figure out what he was saying. And then Caecilius, is that what you said?
Caecilius. What about the ancient one?
All right. Okay, so the ancient one is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Caecilius is Darth Vader. Dormammu is the Emperor. Doctor Strange is Luke. Princess Leia is the nurse
woman.
Girlfriend.
Yeah.
The sidekick.
Yeah. Who are the droids?
They're not in this one.
How about the cloak? The cloak of levitation could be like a sentient droid character.
Something like that. Yeah, it could be C-3PO or maybe but yeah, it was very much the same kind of journey. Where like he fought the bad guy, but there was an even bigger bad guy behind him, and blah blah blah, whatever. They're all very similar. But as far as like the scary, sorcery, evil, cultic kind of stuff, I just viewed it as the way I view the Force in Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't believe in it, but I can enjoy the storytelling behind it.
Right. They did something interesting though with the magic component. Everyone before the movie came out was like, ooh, Marvel's going into magic now. They're not just into science and technology. And even with Thor, if you remember back to that original movie, Thor has this conversation where he says, yeah, what we do appears to less advanced people as magic, but it's really just science.
Yeah,
right?
so you call it science.
Right, you call it.
Yeah.
In this movie, though, it's straight up magic, but they did something interesting with it because even though, he's the sorcerer supreme and there's magic and all that, it's not occultic magic. It's not like demons and angels and gods and deities and stuff like that. It's even early on, they talk about how, well, there's a multiverse. There are infinite dimensions and universes, which is actually a scientific theory. And we draw energy from these different, so they try to take what is magic and give it a veneer of scientific legitimacy, which I was like, okay, fine. But it's not like some movies that get into occultic, truly satanic kind of stuff. That's not really part of the Marvel cosmos.
Well, right, because it wasn't like those things were on the side of evil. Like this was about good versus evil, and both could tap into this energy or the source or whatever it might be. So
your comment about, or your proposal about Christian geeks, this sort of reminds me of way back, was it in 1999 that The Matrix came out? Remember The Matrix?
Oh, do I remember The Matrix?
Of course you remember. The red pill, the blue pill.
I watched that movie. I wanted to run up walls, dodge bullets. That was one of the most amazing.
So I was in seminary when that movie came out, and I remember I don't know what ministries I was a part of at the time, but everybody was totally geeking out on The Matrix and like, oh, this is like a super Christian movie and we're going to use this for outreach because it's so, there's all these kind of spiritual themes in it. And I sat back having undergrad studied Eastern religions and Buddhism and Hinduism and all this sort of stuff. I'm going, morons, this is not Christian theology wrapped in a sci-fi movie. This is Eastern mysticism wrapped in a sci-fi movie. And I could see the same thing happening with Doctor Strange, where people will read into it a lot of Christian themes, when in fact there's just a lot of Eastern mysticism here, which, there's some similarities in certain ways, but you can't take it too far. So for me, the dominant Christian theme in it, which you've already mentioned, Josh, is it has this parabolic narrative, which is very, very biblical. What I mean by parabolic is you see this in biblical characters over and over and over again. Take Moses. Moses begins as a prince in Egypt, right? He's riding high, he's got power and authority, and then he is just destroyed, right? He
loses everything.
He loses everything. He becomes a fugitive on the run in the wilderness, and it's in that broken spot that he encounters God, and then finds a greater purpose, right? He becomes a deliverer for God's people, and the Lord uses him powerfully. You see this in David. You see it in Jonah, another classic example, right? Prophet of God, brought low, belly of the whale, like total, and then he's regurgitated, resurrected, and God uses him. And you actually see this most vividly in Jesus himself. where he's equal with God, enjoys all the glories of heaven, but he chooses willingly to empty himself, take on the form of a servant, dwells among us, accepts the worst possible death imaginable on the cross, and then, as Philippians 2 talks about, God the Father lifts him up, exalts him above every name. And so there's that parabolic thing, and you see that very clearly with Stephen Strange. Arrogant jerk, neurosurgeon, brought low, loses everything, and goes on this search and has to come to the end of himself and surrender himself, and then is exalted and given this power and is able to help others. So that's a theme you see again and again in Scripture. Beyond that, however, all of the spirituality of this movie is really Eastern mysticism. It's not Christian spirituality at all. It's about harnessing, it's incantation, it's harnessing spiritual powers and bringing them under your control to do what you want. And that is actually quite unbiblical and forbidden in Scripture. But you got to be able to parse out what here conforms to Christian worldview and what doesn't. But beyond any of that, it's just a good story. It's a fun romp of Marvel movie, that's it.
It was very entertaining. The reason I think it worked was because of Cumberbatch. He was my favorite part of the film. I don't know if I'd have enjoyed it if someone else was in that role. I did think it was nuanced. It wasn't just simple black and white, bad versus evil. I mean,
Right.
there was questions of, the way Doctor Strange saved the world was even brought into question, like, hey, you did some things that were...
You kind of broke the rules here.
Right, yeah, some moral, questionable things that he did. So I thought that was interesting.
They are setting up a sequel there where one character seems very by the book,
Right.
legalistic,
Right.
zealot, and Doctor Strange is more of a, well, yeah, there's higher principles at work here that necessarily
Right.
sometimes would require us to bend the rules a little bit. And,
Right.
and you can almost see a grace versus legal law kind of almost Les Miserables type metaphor being set up for the second
Oh yeah, no,
movie here.
that's a good analogy. Yeah, actually. But yeah, I thought it worked. To me, it was the same old, but it was fun to see on the big screen. Great visuals.
Yeah, really cool.
So, yeah, I mean, as someone who is a Christian and is kind of geeky, yeah, I could read into it a lot and walk away and enjoy it and not be ruined by it. So,
Yeah, so your proposal,
that it
Again.
was made for Christian geeks everywhere.
I will agree with that.
All right.
And my proposal was that Doctor Strange will be the first but not the last Marvel movie that incites a boycott call from certain conservative Christians, which is already happening. So I
was
don't
gonna
even
say-
need your approval of my proposal because it's empirically true.
That's right. You have proof.
I have proof. But I think by introducing magic and sorcery into the Marvel universe, I think there's probably going to come up more in subsequent movies, like the Infinity War and all that sort of stuff.
Which, on a side note, once again, and we were talking about this earlier, every step Marvel has made, I've questioned and doubted that they were going to pull it off. Because Thor seemed dorky to me, Ant-Man seemed ridiculous, Captain America, like you said, was campy, but they pull it off. And I'm
Guardians of the Galaxy, stinking talking raccoon in a tree.
That's right. And then I thought, okay, now we're getting into magic, and I thought, all right, this would be where it just wouldn't work because
It's where they jump the shark.
Right, because like with magic, you can get away with anything. It's like, well, it's magic. It's like you can just explain it away. Where versus like an Iron Man, he had limitations to what he could do.
Yeah.
And we could understand it at some level. With magic, it seemed like it's like, oh, that's lame. They just conjure something up and they beat the bad guy. But they did it. They pulled it off. I thought.
Okay, here's my one annoyance with the film. And again, it's one of those, can Marvel pull it off? But they have now introduced time manipulation into, and whenever a movie,
Superman.
exactly, Superman did this. Like, why didn't Superman just circle the Earth backwards every time something went wrong and undid it?
Right.
They did this in Harry Potter with that, whatever that thing was that Hermione had that could turn back time like 15 minutes and undo it. Like, why didn't you just keep that and use it every time something bad happened?
Right.
And now, spoiler alert, in Doctor Strange, they introduce another Infinity Stone, and it's the Time Stone, and he can essentially reverse time with that stone. And you're like, okay, now we have time travel. Can't you just use this to get yourself out of any mess that ever happens ever again? And it seems like lazy storytelling whenever you introduce that element.
I agree.
But they also had to introduce it because there is the time gem. It's part of the mythology of Marvel that is, they're building toward. But I don't know. I just kind of like, okay, here we go again.
But I will say, my kids, I brought my my 12-year-old and my 9-year-old to see this, and their favorite part was the ending scene. I won't give it away, but when he was using the time stone, one, it was just very funny, but and clever, I thought, even though it was, like you said, a little bit cheating. But that was the most entertaining part for them.
So the question is, going forward, how does that play into more Marvel movies with the time stuff?
I don't know.
X-Men did this with their Days of Future Past. I have no idea what on earth is going on now in the X-Men universe because there's so many
parallel.
It's overly confusing. So overall, though, good movie. Enjoyed it. Encourage people to see it. Be discerning about what themes are actually consistent with a Christian worldview, which ones are not. But don't, the sky's not falling or the world's not ending because Marvel has.
You never did Dungeons and Dragons?
No.
That's why
I'm a pastor.
Jason? Nope. No, you're too young.
Okay. We did something old, something new, something borrowed. This is where we take an article or something from somewhere else and we want to reflect on it. And this continues to talk about Doctor Strange, but Josh, you found something at Relevant Magazine?
Yeah, so Relevant Magazine interviewed Scott Derrickson, the director of this film, which you guys brought up, or Phil Vischer brought up Scott Derrickson on a previous podcast because he is a Christian filmmaker, or I should say he's a Christian who is a filmmaker.
Yeah.
But he made horror films. That was his bent.
Right. Okay. What were some of those? Do you have the...
Yeah, he did The Exorcism of Emily Rose. He did Deliver Us from Evil.
Sinister.
Sinister. Okay.
He wrote that.
I've seen none of these.
I'm not a horror film fan, so I missed all of these.
And somehow these didn't end up in like the genre of churches renting out whole theaters as an outreach event kind of thing.
That is correct. But they were critically acclaimed, big box office, because they can be made for cheap, and then they get a cult following, and they had big names behind it, like Jerry Bruckheimer. Produced one of them, Keanu Reeves, Eric Bana, Jennifer Connelly in a lot of his films. So he was successful. So he built a list of films that got him notoriety. And apparently he was a big Doctor Strange fan to begin with.
Okay.
And then what's interesting is that he is a Christian. And so a couple things, just some quotes I grabbed from the article. And this is the film director speaking. He said, I was really taken with Doctor Strange, the Doctor Strange character himself, a character who had been on top of the world with everything, was kind of a jerk, and through a gauntlet of pain and suffering, really learned to grow spiritually and overcome himself. He saw this as a one man's journey from being this soulless but self-satisfied, egomaniacal, high-level New York neurosurgeon to being brought down to the deepest valley and losing everything, losing his identity, sense of soul, relationships, and so on. But into something much more, much greater, and much bigger than he ever knew he could be. So I think, number one, the attraction of the story that we talked about, just, what'd you call it, parabolic?
A parabolic.
Parabolic.
Yeah, it's the inverse of a not the arch that goes up, but the one that goes down.
Got it.
Right. Yeah. Tony Stark does the same thing in Iron Man.
Right.
It's the same narrative, essentially. But yeah, it's a very Christian narrative.
Right. And what's interesting about this director, like he quoted when he got this job as director, he sent out a tweet from Thomas A. Kempis.
Yes,
okay.
It's one of my favorite. He's not early church, but Middle Ages Christian writers.
He wrote The Imitation of Christ.
Yeah,
and it says, "Who has a harder fight than he who is striving to overcome himself," which is the theme of this film. But what I found was interesting is, I'll read this to you and then we can discuss this, I think. When pressed, this is from the article, when pressed to consider how his Christian faith influenced his work on Doctor Strange, Derrickson observed that he's gotten away from the impulse needed to express his own point of view as he's matured as a filmmaker. Mm-hmm. So, first of all, it's either Derrickson or the author saying he's reached a level of maturity where he doesn't feel it's necessary to give his point of view as a Christian, and that he can just tell a story. And immediately I think of other filmmakers who are Christians who that's what they're driven to do, is to drive their point of view. Discuss.
Next issue. different strokes for different folks. I think there are some people who have a vocation or a calling to communicate explicitly Christian messages or explicitly Christian teaching, doctrine, the gospel, whatever. I mean, Phil does this with most of the stuff he's created, whether it's VeggieTales or What's in the Bible or the Buck Denver Space Odyssey thing. And that's fine. And there are other Christian creatives who create visual art or literature or poetry or music or films, and you may look at it and go, well, there's nothing intrinsically explicitly Christian about this except that it's well told and it's a beautiful story, or there's beauty in this music or in this artwork. And I think of Maku Fujimura, who's a painter, very committed Christian believer, yet he does a lot of abstract art, and you would look at it and there's no explicitly Christian message in his painting, but he can articulate a theology of creativity which is profound, and it's infused in the work he does. So it's not one's right and the other's wrong. It's a matter of vocation. What are you called to do? And Scott Derrickson is a filmmaker. I'd be interested if he would ever choose willingly to make a film that had no redemptive element to it whatsoever, that was just saturated in non-Christian values. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm trying to even think of an example of a film that
Fast and Furious?
No, I mean, I don't think I've seen any of those. I'm guessing they're just a bunch of motorheads racing around with drugs in their trunk or something, right?
That's what I assumed too.
Yeah. But like something which is truly depraved as a film. Like,
I didn't get that impression from reading about him.
Yeah.
And what and even his horror films, even though you may not want to see that, which I won't see, but even those, there's a
redemptive quality. Yeah. So, I think he's articulating something which makes sense. I don't think Doctor Strange is a film that there's anything anti-Christian about it. It's certainly not pro-Christian. It's not an explicitly Christian film in any way, but it's not anti-Christian. I don't think Scott Derrickson would intentionally or deliberately choose to make a film that would disparage Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Right? He's not going to do a Temptation of the Christ kind of film that is rooted in remember that movie back from the 80s was very controversial. I think was it Martin Scorsese who made it?
The Last Temptation?
Last Temptation of Christ, right. I don't think he would probably do that.
No.
But to make a film that isn't explicitly Christian, that's fine.
But growing up in a Christian home and those kinds of things, and a lot of your Christian upbringing is defined by what you're not allowed to see. And then here's a guy who's making horror films, which seems to be explicitly anti-Christian, but apparently not necessarily. And then a film like Doctor Strange, which now it's got a foot in the whole mysticism world, where a lot of people are disturbed by that as Christians. I find it intriguing that he is a follower of Christ who can explore these realms. And I find that I don't know the guy, I don't know much about him, but I find that encouraging.
Yeah.
And interesting.
I think we've talked about this before, maybe on this podcast or on the other, but somebody made an observation that I was reading some time ago about why is there really no great Christian literature coming out of evangelical traditions, right? You have all those like Amish romance novels for Christian moms, but they don't.
What?
You don't have. Just go with it. You don't have like a. Really, really great Christian writers tend to come out of Roman Catholicism. Flannery O'Connor, you go on down the list. But, or even Silence, that movie's coming out this...
Martin Scorsese.
Martin Scorsese is making the film, but the book was written by, I forget, it was a Japanese writer, but he's a Roman Catholic.
Oh.
And you go, well, why does the Roman Catholic tradition tend to produce great artists when the evangelical tradition does not?
Why is it?
Well, the argument is that Roman Catholicism has a sacramental theology, and this is getting kind of deep into the weeds here, but in Roman Catholicism, they believe that the wine and the bread can be both wine and bread, but literally be the body and blood of Christ. It's a doctrine called transubstantiation, right? Whereas in evangelical tradition, it's, well, no, this is just bread and this is just grape juice, but they're symbolic of Jesus' body and blood, but they're not actually his body and blood. Like they're literally juice and bread.
Right.
And in evangelical theology, a thing is just one thing. And therefore, if you're going to make a Christian movie, it needs to be an explicitly Christian movie, right? Whereas Roman Catholicism has this embedded theology that says that things can have multiple meanings at multiple levels and can be multiple things at once.
Yeah.
So you can make a Christian story which isn't actually about Jesus Christ, but he's embedded. I mean, look at Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Right? There is nothing explicitly Christian about Lord of the Rings, and yet it's infused with so many Christian values and virtues.
Was he Catholic?
Yes. So, there's a double meaning to it all that lives within a Roman Catholic worldview and theology that for evangelicals, it's no, things need to be plain, simple, straightforward. This is how it is, no mystery. Bread is bread, juice is juice, gospel's gospel, and that's it. It just has to be one-dimensional. And I think there's something to that. But Derrickson is articulating a view of things which is more nuanced and complicated, which is not typical of an evangelical mindset.
Yeah.
So...
Well, I grew up Catholic, and I don't have any of these gifts, so I can't really speak.
Well, something didn't stick.
I
You
know.
know what? It's the Dungeons and Dragons. That's it.
That's it.
It just became like a barrier to
My
you.
grandmother knew.
Yeah. Okay, finally, we did something old, something new, something borrowed, and now it's time for something blue. This is where we share briefly something that we've watched recently that either blew our minds because it was so good or it blew chunks. It was so bad. Okay. Josh, do you have a blue mind or blue chunks?
Blue Mind.
All right.
This is a very positive, excellent short film. So there's a company, an organization called Moving Works. So like DreamWorks, but moving.
Okay.
Like I'm moving down the road. Moving Works. It's a film company that makes films to spread the gospel. And it's a non-for-profit. I believe anyone can use any of these films for free. And they're short films. They might be, 5 or 10 minutes long. They've gone overseas to interview people. And they're little documentaries is what they are.
Okay.
One of them was Betty Goes to Jail. And it's about a woman who, in the Midwest, who is the least likely person to go spend any time visiting a jail, but felt called by the Lord to go do this.
So she's visiting the jail.
Visiting a jail.
Okay.
And so she's, having Bible studies with women who are in prison. But and that was a cute one. That was really sweet. There was,
and these are real people. These
Real
are not
people,
these are not
documentaries.
actors. This
Not
isn't like a
actors.
video version of a chick track.
correct.
Okay, yeah, these are.
These are real people. The most. There we go. Yeah, Betty Goes to Jail. He's
Oh.
got it pulled up.
Betty looks like a total fiend.
That she doesn't she?
She looks like every grandmother you've ever seen.
That's right. Well, the most recent one is Out of the Darkness, about a man who was abused, dealt with physical, sexual, emotional abuse as a child, shares that experience, and then just how really just the power of Christ and his relationship and his relationship with his wife helped him deal with that as an adult. And there's an actual scene where he's sharing this with other men in his life, and it's very powerful. And I recommend for anyone to check it out, but especially if you know someone or if you've ever dealt with that type of abuse. The guy who made this, Peter Craig, I met him in film school. He's an award-winning filmmaker. He's a successful screenwriter. Sold a screenplay to who made Narnia films?
Warden. Not Warden, that's jail.
Yeah.
Walden.
Walden Media.
Walden Media.
Thank you. He sold a screenplay to Walden Media. He's made commercials for Adidas and so on. And but anyway, he spent his life wanting to share the gospel. And he does it through filmmaking. Movingworks.org. Check it out.
All right. Well, now you make me feel like a piece of garbage because I have something that blew my mind, but it wasn't nearly as redemptive or spiritual.
It was the Wonder Woman trailer.
No, it was not the Wonder Woman trailer. I don't even want to go to Wonder Woman right now. The DC is, that's a blow chunks kind of thing. Anyway, blew my mind. I am a big fan of the BBC Top Gear show.
Okay.
Okay, and it got canceled. The cast of it is these three old Brits: Jeremy Clarkson, Richard Hammond, and James May. And they had this great chemistry, and the show was hysterical, and it was cars, and it was fun, and it was travel, and it was all this great stuff. Anyway, was it 2 years ago? Jeremy Clarkson got canned because he punched one of the producers, and they fired him from the show. So they all left the show, and they signed a new deal with Amazon for an original show, and it's called The Grand Tour, and it debuts on November 18th, which is 2 weeks from now. But the trailer is out for the new show, and it looks fantastic. I am super, super excited about this show. And the budget is way bigger than it ever was for the BBC Top Gear show. And have you ever watched Top Gear? Do you know anything about it?
No, I know. All I know is, wasn't one of the Friends actors?
Well, yeah, after these guys got fired, they recast the show on the BBC and they brought in whatever that actor's name was.
Matt LeBlanc.
Matt LeBlanc is one of the new guys, but it bombed. The new BBC version bombed because they fired the 3 guys that made it worth watching. So the Grand Tour debuts on Amazon Prime in a couple weeks, and the trailer just looks fantastic. And they go all over the world and they do all these crazy antics, and there's nothing redemptive about it.
Wait, but is it any of the original guys?
Yeah, it's the 3 original guys, same cast. It's the 3 original guys. They've left the BBC because they had violent outbursts, and now they're at Amazon Prime.
They've gone through therapy and they're back in
something
action.
like that. And it's my son and I love watching the show together.
Okay.
It's funny. They do crazy stuff. They travel all over the world and they do these car reviews. It's a really, if you haven't seen the show, this is, by the way, the original BBC Top Gear with these guys was the #1 show in the world.
Holy cow.
Throughout the planet. Like, it is the top show in the world. And they did a US version of it, which sucked. It does not work the same way as the BBC version did. And now it's going to Amazon Prime. And if you are into cars or you're into older, uptight, snooty British guys, it's kind of like old James Bond movies, how they would travel all over the world and you'd see these exotic places and then he'd do crazy stuff. It's a little bit like that.
Wow.
I don't know how to describe it, but watch the trailer, the Grand Tour. It's fun. It's great. Okay, so thank you guys for sticking it out. We apologize again for the long delay between episodes. We're going to do another one before too long. We got a number of movies on our list. Leave us your feedback, your comments. Tell us what you thought of Doctor Strange or any of the other films that we've mentioned on this episode. Thanks for listening to the Movie Proposal. You may now kiss this episode goodbye.